We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I will be very careful about slinging stuff. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube and anywhere you're listening to podcasts. Today we're talking best and worst case scenario for the NFC. How you doing, Sam?
Doing good. I mean, it's a different day because my strobe light isn't going. I'm going to try and do this show without the fan going and see if we can last.
Completely different day. It's a completely different PFF shirt than I wore on Monday. I just wear the same shirt every day. That's how we roll. But
there are
on
a bunch of them in the drawer upstairs.
Yeah, we do. I might grab another one. They're very comfy. We, on Monday, went team by team in the AFC, gave a little best and worst case scenario. We're going to do a little tight version of that for the NFC today as best we can. We're also asking you, the people, to vote on a future episode for us. We want to talk NFL draft historically, 1999, 2006, 2008, some old draft where we'll just, review it, talk about it, have some fun with it. Let us know any drafts that appeal to you, and we'll do that on a future show, so let us know. Ready to go?
Yeah.
We're going to get into the best and worst case scenarios in the NFC. We're going to go reverse alphabetical order, much like we did in the AFC. So that starts with the Washington Commanders, Sam. What's the best case scenario for the Washington Commanders? It's got to be centered around Sam Howell being the dude, right?
Yeah. Best case scenario for them is Sam Howell is good. And they have their quarterback. And they found him in the 5th round. And now they have the cheat code for NFL success, which is talented, good quarterback on a rookie deal. And not just a rookie deal, but a 5th round rookie deal, which is worth absolute peanuts to the team. Like, that is their jackpot scenario, which would put them, I think, in the playoffs, in the NFC. Admittedly, tough division relative to some other ones, but I think that would probably force them into the postseason as one of those wild cards within that NFC East.
Yeah, it's definitely surrounding Sam Howell. I think the other interesting thing here is I think Washington's roster is solid, right? I mean, the other part I would add here is Chase Young. In basically a contract year, they denied his 5th-year option, and if he comes back healthy, now you're talking about Chase Young with Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne and Montez Sweat, maybe the best starting defensive line in the NFL. At least they are, in my opinion. Maybe they don't have the depth as maybe the Eagles have or whatever, but all of those guys come together, and so you could have a really good defense, and you got some playmakers, man, with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, to go with Sam Howell. All of those things come together, and the Commanders are in the playoff picture. I don't know how much damage they can even do. Of course, that depends on Sam Howell being like a phenom versus just good. But if he's good, they're a playoff caliber team, and I think that's a fair best-case scenario for Washington.
Yeah, I think so, too. I mean, that I think is definitely a real – like, they were not a bad team last season despite their quarterback situation. If Sam Howell is actually pretty good, they're in a good spot.
Now, worst case scenario, I think the answers are going to look similar for, say, Washington, when we eventually get to the Falcons in 3 hours with Desmond Ridder. It's just, is their young quarterback good? So worst case scenario is Sam Howell's not good, and you're looking for a quarterback next year, and he's not good to the point where you're winning just a handful of games. Now, maybe it ends up being good because you're in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes by accident, but that would be the worst case here for Washington, is just you lose a lot of games because quarterback play.
Well, at which point your worst case becomes a combination of your you're way out on Sam Howell. Like, he's obviously not good enough to be a starting caliber quarterback. Maybe you end up benching him. You go to Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett actually wins you a couple of games. Now you actually take yourself out of the Caleb Williams sweepstakes because Jacoby won you a few games, and now you're only picking 5th overall in the draft, but you don't have a quarterback. So that is probably their true worst case scenario.
Well painted worst case scenario. Sam Howell is not good, but you're good enough to lose out on the top quarterbacks next year.
Right.
All right, that's Washington. I'll tell you what a good case scenario is. As a parent, your top priority is always your children's well-being. So I'd say life insurance is a good best case scenario. You want to give them everything they need to grow and thrive both now and in the future with term life insurance from Fabric by Gerber Life. Help protect your family so their future is secure no matter what happens. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get a surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy quickly, often in less than 10 minutes. Life insurance can have a bad rap for being complicated, but Fabric makes it easy to apply with its seamless digital experience. It's all online and on your time. And if you need the extra support, you can access a team of licensed agents who can answer questions along the way. So take steps to help protect your family today with Fabric by Gerber Life. Take the 60-second quiz to find out if term life insurance is right for you and apply today in just 10 minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company and distributed by Gerber Life Agency, LLC, by using Fabric Technologies, not available in certain states. Price is subject to underwriting and health questions. For more information, visit us at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Not my best work. Tampa Bay Bucks are next. Will you even allow yourself to say that the best case scenario is Baker Mayfield becomes the guy?
No, I don't think that's a realistic outcome.
Even in a best case scenario show here.
Yeah, I know. I just don't. I'm out. I'm out on Baker. I just don't see it anymore.
Best case scenario, maybe Kyle Trask takes over. But so here's what I think. They still have a lot of talent on this team, particularly the wide receivers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage. Godwin's going to be another year removed from his knee injury. I think they could be better offensively just by having Dave Canales taken over. I think the run game will be more effective. So best case is the things that were so bad last year offensively are just automatically good because of the change of scenery and all that stuff, new regime, and it's a weak NFC South. So we're talking about a team that can win the NFC South again. So when we're talking like what is the season outcome, the Bucs can win the South. I don't think they do damage in the playoffs, but they can win the South this year, even with Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask at quarterback.
Like, is that their goal? Like, what's success for Tampa Bay this season? Like, from an ownership point of view, if you're the Bucs owners,
I don't know if you're happy. I mean, I don't know if you're long-term happy with that because I don't think they're bad enough. They're say what you want about Todd Bowles, like the head coach. He's a good defensive coach. They'll have a solid defense. They still have talents there. Their offense could be better just because they've got the playmaking talent over there. So it's going to be tough I think it's going to be tough for them to win only 2 or 3 games. I think it's going to be really tough in the NFC for them to be competing for Caleb Williams.
Right.
Which puts you right in that 7 to 9 win range, which could win the South. So, yeah, I mean, the goal would be like, hey, that'd be awesome if we could have Caleb Williams. I don't think they're bad enough to do that, though.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could convince me that Baker Mayfield can have the kind of season that can get Tampa Bay in that, 9-win range, which could win them the NFC South. I don't think even after that, you would be sort of confident hitching your wagon to Baker Mayfield going forward. Again, not unless he plays at a level that I'm just not anticipating. But if that's considered a successful season for the Bucs, like, hey, we have no shot whatsoever of winning a Super Bowl, but we win the division and everybody's happy, then cool. And that, I think, is a realistic outcome for them because that division isn't great. And all they have to do is get past New Orleans effectively or a surprise Carolina or, whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a realistic best case scenario is that somehow the quarterback situation is viable and the rest of the roster is good enough in the hangover of the Tom Brady era that they still win the division.
Worst case scenario, again, we'll say this for a few NFC teams, is you don't win a lot of games. Everything is not good, but you might be getting the next great quarterback in a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or whoever else is coming out. So that's like the fallout. But what could go wrong there? The offense that was rough last year is going to look worse because Tom Brady's not there, and it's Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. Guys, Baker hasn't played well in 3 years. Kyle Trask has not looked good even in the preseason. So you don't have great options at quarterback on paper. I think the offensive line comes with massive question marks after they weren't good last year. And in the defense, right? Like they're solid, but they don't have the same pieces that they had even just 2 years ago. So we're looking at a below average team that plays below average football and wins a handful of games.
Yeah, similar story to Washington. Like the worst case scenario is the quarterback situation is non-viable. You bounce between Baker, Kyle Trask, whoever else ends up starting a game for them. John Walford is on the roster right now. Maybe he gets a couple of starts because of that's how bad it is. But they somehow win enough games that they're not picking number one overall, and they actually have work to do to get the quarterback that they want. The other sort of worst case scenario is that the players that they've added, in the last couple of years at reasonably high draft pick positions simply don't pan out. So Joe Tryon-Shoyinka took a step forward last year. If he doesn't take another one or if he goes back, he's becoming kind of a miss. He was supposed to be a project first rounder anyway, like a guy that was going to take some development. But if he simply doesn't develop, that's problematic. Same with Logan Hall on the defensive line, more of an interior player, but a guy that was supposed to be making noise at this point in terms of contributions to that defensive line. And if he doesn't, and then, the one they drafted this year, Kalijah Kancey, the Aaron Donald comps. But the flip side of that is, well, there's a reason Aaron Donald slid number 14 or whatever it was when he was drafted. Like, what if Kalijah Kancey embodies the concerns for a guy of that size rather than the exceptions to those players and simply doesn't look good year one?
Yeah, going back to the best case scenario for a little bit, it's like the youth movement in Tampa Bay, those guys stepping up and looking promising. On the bad side is if they're not, we're talking about a Tampa Bay team going in the wrong direction. Over under for both Tampa Bay and Washington, by the way, over at DraftKings, looking at their over under. Win total 6.5 for both teams. On to the Seattle Seahawks, where they're at 8.5. A little more optimism in Seattle. What does the best case scenario look like for the Seahawks?
Geno staying at the level he was last year, I guess, or at least the level he was earlier in the year. The young players that they had last year and that they've assembled this year, hitting the ground running or continuing, their impressive starts. Tariq Woolen developing, Devin Witherspoon looking like the best corner in the draft. Like just the general, like you said, the youth movement continuing to actually pay dividends for the Seahawks, in addition to Geno Smith continuing to look like the guy at quarterback, as unexpected as that was last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's Geno Smith, who we've talked about on the mid-tier-ish quarterback contract, allowing for the rest of the roster to be better, to have the investment in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, to have Jackson Smith and Jigba as this good, solid number 3 as a rookie, or D. Eskridge, but just having that wide receiver 3 step up for Geno Smith. And yeah, you mentioned Devin Witherspoon, just all of the youth from last year's draft class continuing their development. And Seattle's tough, and Bobby Wagner, who could still play, coming in to solidify linebacker. There's a lot of things to maybe be positive about Seattle. In the AFC, we kept talking about teams maybe they can get to the AFC Championship, but there's so many of them. Can Seattle get to the NFC Championship, where it looks like it's the Eagles and the Niners, but there's a fine line there in the NFC. It's not as competitive as the AFC. Can Seattle get to the NFC Championship and beyond if all those things go right?
Yeah, I mean, if you assume, like the AFC, there's so many good teams, you're going to have to run a gauntlet to get anywhere in the playoffs. Whereas in the NFC, if we assume that we're expecting effectively a rematch of the NFC Championship game, 49ers Eagles again, for somebody else to get there, all they need is to win, one game against a really good opponent. And you don't even necessarily need that if somebody else knocks that guy, knocks that team off for you. Like if Washington somehow shocks the Eagles in the first round of the playoffs, then your pathway could be clear to play the Niners in the NFC Championship game. So who knows? But yeah, it's possible. I think for Seattle, making them and looking good, even looking better than a year ago, is probably the most optimistic scenario. I guess that probably, you could throw an NFC Championship game appearance in there, but to me, that's almost that would be looking too much at the results rather than the sort of the outcome, the process. because they're not going to be better, I don't think, than the Eagles and the Niners, right? So they can still get to the title game, but that's kind of besides the point, because the sort of the mark to clear is actually being better than those two teams, which is not, I don't think, a realistic outcome.
So it's just being back on the right track. Geno Smith still being good, justifying the investment in him as the guy over the next couple of years. Worst case scenario, though, basically Geno turns back into a pumpkin.
Yeah.
More specifically,
really
he was number 2 in the NFL in turnover-worthy plays. I think he only had 9 official interceptions during the regular season, so the touchdown to interception ratio looks incredible. So very specifically, if Geno, who, again, so impressed with what he did last season, a few very just elite games, if the lack of consistency comes back to bite, or the turnover luck, right? If he had a lot of issues throwing the ball into harm's way, in the end zone in particular, if a lot of those things come back to bite this year, then we might be talking about Seattle picking back in the top 10. I think that's also a realistic outcome, despite all the optimism coming out of Seattle from last season.
Yeah, I mean, he looked a lot worse down the stretch, but so did the offensive line.
Yeah.
It's difficult to know where the blame landed there. The biggest problem is Geno going back to that level, though. Like, the offensive line being bad would be an issue, but you could work around it. If it's actually this is Geno who just reverted back to Geno, you can get away from it, but that's clearly a lot worse for Seattle because they thought they found a quarterback.
Well, Sam, what if the player you benched in fantasy football just went off? Well, with Best Ball and DraftKings, you get the best of your team all season long. There's no bench. This year, Best Ball on DraftKings is bigger and better than ever, with $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes up for grabs. Join DraftKings' biggest Best Ball contest today and get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars as soon as the draft is over. You enter the DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest and snake draft your team for the season. Each week, you'll automatically rack up points from all your top scorers. There's no ads, no drops, and no trades. Teams with the most points by the end of the season will have a shot to take home the $1 million top prize. Head to the DraftKings app and sign up with the code PFF. Join the DraftKings $10 million Best Ball Tournament and get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars. That's code PFF only on DraftKings. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. One per customer. Opt-in required with $10 entry fee. Bonus issued as 10 DK dollars. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com/promotions for details. Ends July 14th, 2023. All right, man, we're on to the San Francisco 49ers. Best case scenario for the Niners this year.
They do exactly what we just talked about. They appear in a rematch of the NFC Championship game, only this time they have quarterbacks and therefore might actually show that they're capable of making it to a Super Bowl and winning a championship. Yeah,
Sam
they're
Darnold.
another one of those teams. Obviously, elite contender. Their best outcome involves a championship, involves a Lombardi trophy. But simply, not having the season taken away from them by injuries would be a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think more specifically, it's Brock Purdy, the quarterback. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. I mean, we're just painting a picture. Like if Trey Lance actually wins the job and becomes the running threat that we talked about and develops as a passer, like all that's fair. I think most realistically, it's Brock Purdy builds on what was such an impressive rookie season. Because he's making under $1 million a year over the next few years, and he becomes the guy that you build around, and you become a powerhouse for the next few years with rookie contract Brock Purdy, all of your plethora of playmakers, Kyle Shanahan at the dials, Javon Hargrave coming in as a great pass rusher. All of that comes together, and it doesn't matter that DeMeco Ryans is gone. The defense is still going to be good. You've got a great linebacker core and a pass rush, and you've got players in the secondary, and you're a championship caliber team, and you get over the hump and win a title. Worst case scenario, though. Okay.
I guess it feels greedy to be sort of specifying which quarterback, looks good. I feel like if the 49ers come out of the season, they've been in the title game, they've been in the Super Bowl, whatever, and a quarterback has been playing well for them, I think that's the best case scenario. It feels like you're getting greedy to be like, but it has to be Purdy because that's the even better contract, and that's maximizing the good scenario for them.
I mean, if I was being greedy, I think I'd rather Trey Lance be good because he probably adds a dimension to my offense. At the same time, he'd have to pay him sooner, so you factor in that stuff. But either way, quarterback play is good enough to win a championship. That's the best case scenario for the Niners. Worst case scenario, though, Brock Purdy wasn't that guy. Yeah, quarterback play the other way.
Yeah. I mean, it really, like, Brock Purdy's not the same guy post-elbow, whether or not that's actually cause or effect. Like, whether or not he was always going to regress, he just had a really good run, or whether or not an elbow injury is actually tragically prevented this incredible story from, reaching its full potential, whatever, him not working out, and then Trey Lance not being able to rescue that would be even worse, right? Like, Purdy not working out would be bad. That would be unideal. That's not what they're looking for. Trey Lance then failing as a sort of backup option, having quote unquote failed. Like, it's harsh to call him a failure at this point, but like, you know what I mean? Hasn't immediately seized the starting job with both hands. Them failing to seize the starting job as a backup option to Brock Purdy, his failure. And then whatever Sam Darnold ends up being, like, just some combination of somehow the 49ers have had these three options going into the season, and none of them manifested as a viable starter going forward.
The other things I would highlight, in addition to the quarterback, might be attrition. So offensive line, as we've mentioned, it's not the highest graded offensive line. They've got some weaknesses there. Have to replace Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. Yeah. And then coaching attrition, right? They handled the loss of Robert Saleh a couple of years ago. D'Amico Ryans took over, proved to be an awesome defensive coordinator, but now he's out. Mike McDaniel's gone, but they were still good offensively now. But now you lose Bobby Slowick, right? Can they handle all of the coaching attrition from the last couple of years? And even in the front office, they're losing Rand Carthon, and you're losing a lot from a very well-run organization over the last couple of years. That also could potentially come back to bite in a worst-case scenario where maybe they don't make the playoffs. Also, like, if the quarterback play is that bad, are they even a playoff team?
Yeah, I mean, you feel like the offensive side will be fine simply because, Kyle Shanahan, at minimum, regardless of how much credit he deserves relative to his assistant coaches, at the very minimum, he can kind of step in to bridge whatever gap is there if the next guy stinks, right? So if the replacement for Bobby Slowick is a disaster, Kyle Shanahan can kind of step in and fix that. Whereas the defensive side would be the side you'd be more concerned with. If losing D'Amico Ryans is an absolute body blow, then that's not something that Kyle Shanahan can just step in and fix from his side of the ball. That would be a potential concern.
All right, we're on to the Philadelphia Eagles. By the way, the Niners over-under, we have them at 10.5 over at DraftKings. The Eagles are at 11.5. I don't think there's anyone besides the Chiefs up at that level. 11.5 for the Eagles. Obviously, the best case scenario is them winning the Super Bowl, going back to the Super Bowl and winning it. What needs to happen for that to occur for the Eagles this year?
Yeah, I mean, best case scenario, one step closer, you actually win the championship. Not much needs to happen, really, for them to do that again.
Jalen Hurts doesn't drop the football.
Yeah, I mean, they're the prohibitive favorites in the NFC. You would expect them to be in the NFC title game and then see what can happen from there. The only things you can even bring up to sort of highlight are the maintaining of the incredible play for, really important players like Jalen Hurts. We talked about development is not always linear. It's been pretty linear for Jalen Hurts. So if anything deviates from that straight line graph from, 55 grade to 77 to 88, like if that doesn't continue next year or doesn't plateau or actually goes down, that's a problem. Same thing with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and blah, blah, blah. And then, again, like Cincinnati, the planned obsolescence, the succession plans that they've had in place at various positions, they're covered, but that's assuming a certain baseline of play from all these players, which if it doesn't happen is a problem. So Reed Blankenship at safety, Terrell Edmonds at safety, Nakobe Dean at linebacker. Like, there's all these different spots where they've planned the next guy to come in and seamlessly take the place of the guy that departed in free agency or whatever it is. If they catch a crappy end of distributions, from those guys, and you just get an unfortunate, like, most of them don't work out, that will be problematic.
Yeah, I would add to that maybe the age at the quarterback group as well, or the starters, Darius Slay and James Bradbury. So basically everything that we thought was awesome for the Eagles last year. The fact that they got Slay playing a little bit better. They got Bradbury to complement him. James Bradbury has had an up and down career, and he's getting older, right? So there is a world where those guys do drop off a little bit, and the Eagles just have little holes across the up and down the roster that they didn't have a year ago.
I mean, simple volatility could, would explain cornerback stuff. Like Darius Slay has had bad seasons in his career as well. Like if Darius Slay and James Bradbury simply coincide having a bad year each at the same time, it's probably harder to do given the rest of that defense. But if that happens at the same time as, Blankenship and Dean and Edmonds, not being the players that they were expected to be, it could happen where that defense, it's not going to unravel completely. I think there's too much talent there, but it could take a big step backwards because of that.
Yeah, again, I like the Eagles. I love their roster and all that stuff. It's just a matter of what are the potential flaws going forward. I think the Jalen Hurts thing is interesting, though, right? Because every time a quarterback, repeating myself for the millionth time, it's not just a Madden progression, even though it looks like it for Jalen Hurts, and it kind of looked like it for Josh Allen. Josh Allen actually went from level to like big spike.
Right.
Jalen Hurts has been pretty clear Madden-like progression. Does that level off, right? Because if you want to play that narrative, Derek Carr should still be getting better. Like there are guys that looked like they were on this Madden progression for a while. If Jalen Hurts levels off or takes a step back or whatever it might be, maybe they're not as good. I mean, especially with more investment in him now going forward.
Yeah, I wouldn't be concerned with it leveling off. The concern would be, what if it goes back?
Yeah.
Like, again, it's not this linear Madden line, but it has been for Jalen Hurts. Like, we know that can go the other way. What happens if he loses 10 grading points and goes back to being the 77 graded guy from the year before, which was good, which was fine, which is, good enough to win games, et cetera, but was not a kind of MVP candidate that can go slug it out with Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl.
All right, so we're moving on to the New York Giants' best and worst case scenario. So I said the Eagles over-under is 11.5. The Giants' default here on DraftKings is 7.5. I know they made the playoffs. They were really good last year. But what's the best case scenario now for the Giants? Is it just last year? Or can they get past getting smoked in the divisional round?
No, I think the best case for them is maintaining what happened a year ago. Like, actually, because last year was basically the best case scenario for the Giants, right? It was like, what if all of this stuff works right away and the bad problems for the team or the bad parts of the roster aren't really relevant, and we shock another overachieving sort of fraudster team in the playoffs, like, and sort of hide the fact that we shouldn't be there in the first place either. Like, last year really was the absolute best case scenario for the Giants. Man. So if you're simply able to replicate that, that's as good as it gets this year.
Can we paint a better picture where Daniel Jones is he's getting a better supporting cast, and we're creeping up toward that, what I used to think this Nick Foles level of volatility, this peak where if you put everything around him, it's that much better. I don't think we're there yet from a receiving core standpoint, but it should be better. The offensive line should be better. If Saquon Barkley comes back and plays, you've got that run game component with Daniel Jones in the backfield. You can't put all that together and get to the NFC Championship, maybe?
No.
Okay.
Because they were so they were so overachieving last year that to simply replicate that again this year, I think would be a real achievement. You want to take another step ahead of that? I mean, so for what you're saying to happen, you would effectively have to buy the supposition that last season was actually not overachieving for the Giants, but was a manifestation of Brian Daboll and the coaching, the coaching ability that this group had to extract more than the sum of the parts. And that will continue in perpetuity, much like it does for, guys like Andy Reid or whatever, right? Okay, if that is your baseline, like if that's the stipulation, then I guess you say if you improve his receiving core a little bit, if, Evan Neal improves dramatically up front on the right tackle, if the interior gets better, then there is a scenario where this offense takes a big step forward and the defense with a bit more talent there. Then, yeah, I guess maybe if that's the real dynamic at play here, they could be a better team. I mean, yeah, again, it feels like a little bit like the Seahawks discussion, where the title game itself is kind of irrelevant because I don't see there's a world where they're better than Philadelphia and San Francisco, but they could be better than last year.
So that's the thing, right? So if they overachieve again, right? Because on paper they don't look great, but if they win another 10 games, even if they do get smoked in the divisional round, is it like, man, maybe Brian Daboll and staff they're the dudes, right? I don't know if Daniel Jones is the guy to get them over the hump, and they might need to revisit that in a couple of years, but Daboll we'll start talking about him as Mike Vrabel. I'll put that as the best conversation, because we think Vrabel is so good as a coach. He'll be in that top tier of coaches. We could put Daboll in that conversation a year from now if they overachieve again.
Well, their best case scenario is a season like Philadelphia's a couple of years ago. Remember when they took a step forward, they made the playoffs, and then they got wrecked by Tampa Bay, right? And it was like, I see, that's the golfing class. Like, that's the difference between a good team and a real contender. And then next year, Philadelphia came back with a championship caliber team. That would be the real ideal scenario for the Giants, is that they get there again, even if they get wrecked by, the Eagles or the 49ers or a true contender, but they've at least shown that they're still moving in the right direction, because I think simply repeating last year would be a step forward, because they probably would deserve it this year more than they did last year, given the way those two seasons worked. So I think simply doing that again would be their best case scenario. Because the big sea change from last year in terms of a positive development would be the year that the Eagles just had, which is look like the best team in the conference, make it to the Super Bowl, even if you don't win it. That just feels too far for the Giants.
Worst case feels pretty easy. I mean, it could be a top 10 pick for the Giants. Daniel Jones has had years where he's graded in the 60s or low 70s. I think that's always in the range of outcomes for Daniel Jones, just like a high 70s, maybe even a low 80s grade is in the range of outcomes for Daniel Jones. So if he's back in the low 70s, the offensive line isn't actually that much improved. The fact that they made do last year with a lesser receiving core just catches up to them. And the volatility of defense and the volatility of one play, all those single plays that went their way last year to help them win games, just go the other way.
Yeah, so effectively they catch the other end of variance across the board is their worst case scenario. So both in terms of all those plays bouncing the other way and Daniel Jones. So Jones had 5 interceptions last year and 19 turnover-worthy plays. Like if he goes from being a sort of luckier quarterback to an unluckier one, like if next year, like let's say he replicates the turnover-worthy play rate, 3.1%, which is reasonably high. Let's say he gets unlucky with that, and all of a sudden he has 23 interceptions and plays at the same level otherwise, even with the running ability. Now you're looking at a quarterback who is a turnover machine, is not manufacturing any big plays to offset that. Even with the running ability, that's just not enough. And you just gave him a contract that you now want out of. That's your worst case scenario.
All right, moving on to the New Orleans Saints. Best and worst case scenario for the Saints. I mean, I think it's winning the division with Derek Carr. Yeah. You get the best quarterback in the division. I think that's your best case, but can they even do damage beyond that in the playoffs?
So that would be the question. Do they have a realistic outcome beyond winning the division? Because that seems like what they've set up to do, right? Winning the division is good for us. We get the playoffs, we get everybody excited, everybody's engaged all season long, and that's probably as good as we can do. And we can do that with Derek Carr. Do they actually have the capacity to do anything more than that?
I mean, I think one of the big questions is going to be Dennis Allen as head coach. Because is it results based or is it narrative based? At the end of this season, can we at least say, hey, the Saints took this step forward as a franchise, they win the division, Derek Carr looks like he's going to be the same type of quarterback he is with the Raiders, he's capable of leading a playoff team and everything, defense is still really good, but Dennis Allen's at least the guy here. We might not be ready to win more than one playoff game, but we've shown that Dennis Allen's like out of Sean Payton's shadow, basically. I think that's one of the part of the best case scenario here for the Saints is that everything's pointed up from an organizational standpoint and they're getting the roster back on track and Derek Carr is going to be good enough to win and they win the division.
Yeah, so I think in a way, they could win a playoff game, because once you're in there, like anything can happen. I mean, you can never legislate for when you're going to run into like a team like the Vikings last year and win a game that you probably shouldn't win generally because it's a good matchup or whatever. So winning the division is probably what they're going to achieve. They could win a playoff game once they make it, because there will be other teams in the NFC playoffs that don't look great. But I think a realistic best case scenario for them is you come out of this season and you're encouraged that this can have some long-term viability to it. Not just congratulations, Derek Carr made you're like the division champions in 2023, hang the banner. But actually, there's a scenario where if we put a couple of pieces here or there, we tinker with the roster, we upgrade here, we could actually make, an NFC championship game, or we could beat Philadelphia or San Francisco if things go, bounce the right way. And there's a foundation here that could do damage beyond what we did this year, even if we didn't do it this time. Like that, I think is probably their best case, is that they achieve what they wanted to achieve this year, and they come away optimistic that there is potentially more to be had with the building blocks.
Other specifics in best case, Chris Olave maybe becoming a star at receiver, Michael Thomas probably coming back healthy, defensive line, the youth movement there, all coming good. On the negative side, worst case scenario for the Saints, okay, with the best quarterback in the division on paper, you don't win it. Derek Carr is another rough season. He had his worst season since his rookie year last year. Does he continue that? And the opposite happens. The young defensive line doesn't come together. Michael Thomas still dealing with injuries. All those other things could go wrong.
Yeah, the worst case for them, I think, is pretty simple. It's like we talked about with Jacksonville in the AFC show. It's basically they don't win the division. It's another one of those divisions that feels like it's theirs to lose, right? They set themselves up with, we get Derek Carr in, that's a really high floor. We should win the division from there. And that's realistically what we're trying to do. If that doesn't happen, it's a failure of the season. And whether it's because Carolina or Atlanta or Tampa Bay were unexpectedly way better than they were supposed to be, or whether it's simply that the Derek Carr thing was, just too, you set your sights too low, right? You aimed at this thing that you thought would be a pretty high floor, but was a really low ceiling as well, and it just wasn't good enough. And now you're sort of stuck in this purgatory world of we kind of stink, but not enough to like go get Caleb Williams or whatever. That stinks for the Saints.
All right, we're moving on to the Minnesota Vikings. What's the best case scenario for the Vikings, Sam?
It is as it's always been. You time the Kirk Cousins run for the postseason, right? You make it, you get there as you do, half the time, whatever it is, whatever their actual strike rate is. And then you actually hit that Kirk Cousins run, right? So then instead of winning 11 straight one-score games in the regular season, that doesn't start happening until week 18. And then the wild card round, the division round, you know what I mean? That's your run. And you simply time the Kirk Cousins run that we know is there and is capable of existing for the right time. And they subsequently knock off a bunch of teams. And maybe a Super Bowl is too rich to ask, but they could put themselves in the title game with, a run like that and one really good performance against one of those big juggernaut teams.
Yeah, the term competitive rebuild has been used for the Vikings as well because they've lost some bigger name players, right? They've lost big name players, replacing them with younger players. So it's those younger players, which does happen historically in football. Not all the time, but it's sometimes it's okay to get rid of big names and replace them with younger players, whether it's, Eric Kendricks at linebacker, whatever it might be. All of those things are allowed. Adam Thielen moving on at receiver. And so the young players play well, replace the veterans, at least, even if it's, 2/3 of their production, 3/4 of their production. But the roster overall, the roster health is better. And then just having a new defensive scheme, just out with the old, in with the new. Brian Flores coming in, probably playing more man coverage, just the volatility of defense, maybe leaning their way. The Vikings could be a much better, their peripherals, their metrics could look better, right? All the metrics that say, should you win more games, could look better this year, even if the win totals don't. But if we get those moving in the right direction, I think that's all a win for the Vikings. In addition to, maybe Cousins getting hot at the right time. What's the worst case though for the Vikings? They miss all that talent that they got rid of.
Yeah, and it's that it's that classic world of you failed to achieve your goals. So you missed the playoffs. It didn't go the way you expected it to. You didn't take a step forward. In fact, you took a step back, but critically not bad enough to being able to hard reset and get the next quarterback, Caleb Williams, Drake May, whatever that looks like. Like, that's this world the Vikings have been stuck in for a while, which is the Kirk Cousins thing. Individually, he's been a success. He's been better, I think, than they had any realistic reason to expect when they signed him. Like, he has overachieved expectations, but the team has probably underachieved expectations during the time when he's been overachieving expectations. So they've been trapped in this world of being average. Like, it's become a meme, right? Every single graph you find, the Vikings are up like right in the middle, where the two axes meet. They're right slap bang middle of average at almost everything. The problem with that is even when you hit the crappy end of your range of outcomes, you never hit crappy enough that you can go get the top quarterback in the draft or whoever it is you think could be that guy. So that's their worst case again, is that they have a bad season relative to what they usually do, but they win 6 games and they're still picking like 12th.
And Cousins is in the last year of his contract. Don't know if they're going to extend that at all before the season. So we're just really in QB purgatory and then roster purgatory for the Vikings in a worst case scenario coming out of this year. How about the Los Angeles Rams? This is an interesting one, best and worst case scenario, because best case basically involves 10 to 15 players that we don't know much about all playing well, right? To go with the stars that they have, to go with a Super Bowl winning quarterback of Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, who was the best receiver in football 2 years ago, Aaron Donald, who's the best defensive player in football of the last 10 years, and a whole bunch of unknowns all working out.
Yeah, but I don't even think they need the unknowns to work out for them to sort of hit the best case. I think what they need is the prerequisite parts for the stars to fire working. So by that, I mean, like, the offensive line has to be okay.
Yeah.
Minimum. It has to be viable. It has to be solid enough, because that allows Matthew Stafford to function. That allows the run game to function. That allows the McVay offense generally to function. And if that offensive line is not viable, none of those things happen. So the best case scenario, I think, is the offensive line is solid and those stars are able to fire, and this team immediately bounces back into the postseason. And probably, again, they're in that world of they wouldn't be, I don't think, able to go toe-to-toe with the Eagles and the 49ers as we expect them to be, but they could get to the next tier.
Yeah, it's going to be such an interesting season with the Rams, just because with full rebuilding teams, I'm always like, yeah, you get to see the young guys and who you're going to build around, but at the same time you have Stafford and Kupp and Donald too. It's not a full rebuild. There are still stars. So yeah, look, I think they could do some damage if they just stay healthier than they did last season. They weren't a disaster of a team last year. The offensive line was going to, even if they stayed healthy, the offensive line was going to be an issue, and it was from the get-go, from week 1. But they would have been far more competitive. So yeah, I think best case is you're looking at like 9 or 10 wins maybe. But from like a narrative and franchise standpoint, I don't know what's good coming out of this, because Donald still might be on the doorstep of retirement, and Stafford is still going to be old enough where it's like, I don't know how much I want to invest in him going forward. And you still might be in full rebuild mode a year from now with the Rams, no matter what happens with the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think their best case scenario in terms of this season is, making the divisional round, maybe the championship game. But you're right, in terms of like, what does the future look like? It's difficult to imagine a neat transition period out of this season. Like, other than the worst case scenario, which is everything falls apart and the team stinks.
And Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and now you can do that proper reset thing. But in terms of like, if they win 8-9 games, Stafford bounces back, but he's probably never going to play the way he played before. Donald is always good. He's now in that world of like every offseason it's going to be, is he coming back? Is he retiring? I mean, even McVay has been, on the fence about coming back or not. Like, the important parts of this team are all seemingly mulling retirement, at which point, even if they're good this season, it becomes pretty hard to imagine where they go from there.
So what do I think on the field could happen? I think they could win 9 games or whatever and sneak into the playoffs. Worst case scenario, though, it looks like a team that's relying on several rookies in their 2 deep. A plethora of rookies and second-year players in their 2 deep that even if Stafford is healthy and back and all that, it's like going to be tough to win games. The whole narrative with Stafford is Detroit never put people around him, therefore he couldn't produce. Well, we might be talking about that again. Hey, Stafford can't do this with nobody around him.
Yeah, I mean, narrative-wise, the worst-case scenario for them is the window's closed, right? There's no way back. It's done. You had your shot. You got a championship. You didn't get more. But regardless, it's over now. And you've got to do whatever needs to be done to go, to restart this whole thing, to go in a new direction, to do something different, because there's no way for this team to get back to where it was or where you want it to go. That, I think, is probably their worst case scenario. Is they're bad this year, and it's a clear indication of whether or not there was a debate. Now the window is closed. Your Super Bowl window is done.
All right, we're on to the Green Bay Packers. It's going to, just like Sam Howell, best case scenario is Jordan Love's 12 passes against the Eagles were legit. Jordan Love's the next Hall of Fame quarterback here for the Packers. What else, though, with Green Bay?
Best case scenario is you somehow went Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and then, Pro Bowl elite caliber Jordan Love in sequence in a way that just defies logic. And as you say, the development we saw from him last year, or the encouraging signs in a ridiculously small sample size, was truly indicative of what he can be. And he can be that quarterback going forward. And by the way, the young players that are surrounding him that were sort of problems for the aging Aaron Rodgers, at the end of his career, are actually a great thing for Jordan Love. And they all develop together. And you actually create this nucleus of elite young quarterback, an elite young number 1 wide receiver, an elite young number 2 wide receiver, and young tight ends that you just drafted. And the whole thing creates a foundation of like a juggernaut for the next 10 years.
The style that Jordan Love plays, though, I thought is really interesting as well, because, Favre was the gunslinger type, and Aaron Rodgers was far more conservative with the ball, but he had, incredible arm talent. And then Jordan Love is kind of a mix of those, where he's got a good arm. He's going to be a little bit more careless with the football, but that leads to big play opportunities. Seeing what Jordan Love's style is going to be very fun to see if. So on the best case scenario here is Jordan Love's arm talent shows up, and he's this big play creator, and maybe he cuts down on some of the bad decisions. In the worst case scenario, though, is that Jordan Love's decision making that kind of plagued him at Utah State, and then even early in his preseason games, for whatever that's worth, with the Packers, chucking up Hail Marys into the end zone on first down. Like, you don't throw Hail Marys on first down. Just throwing the ball to the defense and not taking care of the ball, that I think is very much in the range of outcomes in the worst case scenario, where Love is just, too crazy with the football and does not develop, and he's just not as good as he needs to be.
I mean, his best season at Utah State had a turnover-worthy play rate of 2.9%, which is just below the sort of problematic level that we were talking about of Daniel Jones last season of 3.1%. I mean, that's not problematic level, but it's not good, right? Like, Bryce Young is the number 1 pick this year with back-to-back seasons with a turnover-worthy play rate of 2%, 2.0%. So it's almost a full percentage point higher than Bryce Young this season. That was in his best year. His final year, he had a turnover-worthy play rate of 5.2%, which is borderline catastrophic. I mean, that can't really function, let alone in the NFL. That was his college level. So, yes, like, Jordan Love needs to be on the very, very good end of what he's shown so far in terms of taking care of the football. The other end would be his worst case scenario. Jordan Love is a freaking turnover machine, and all the big plays in the world aren't going to offset that.
In the best case scenario, the Packers could win the division here. As much as we like the next team we're going to talk about, the Lions, with the Vikings question marks, the Lions need to be a front runner for the first time in 30 years. The Packers could still win the division. Worst case, they don't make the playoffs again, and they're sitting there wondering about their quarterback again going forward. Is Jordan Love actually the guy we need to build around?
I mean, I would argue in their true best case scenario, there is definitely a range of outcomes where if Jordan Love is legit, if he's for real, the Packers have the roster that can go square up to the 49ers and the Eagles. Like, they wouldn't be as good, but they would be one of the few teams, I think, that could beat them, you know, in a sort of relatively decent number of times. Play the game 100 times, Packers win 30.
The problem I see is Aaron Rodgers had like a 79, 80-ish grade last year. If Jordan Love has that grade this year, that's like, wow, nice. That's a good first starting season for Jordan Love. And that Packers team last year didn't make the playoffs. So yeah, I'm still having a tough time putting the Packers among the best in the NFC, even in a positive light for Jordan Love.
But remember, like, their defense, I think, wildly underachieved last year. Like, it was, remember, heading in a year ago, the narrative was, this is the best defense that Rodgers ever had. And the defense stank. We were like, if it would also involve like a development of those young receivers, right? Christian Watson continues the way he left off. Romeo Doubs takes a step forward. One of the young, like the rookie tight ends, plays well. David Bakhtiari stays healthy all year. And Zach Tom at right tackle is as good as he was at left tackle, like all those kinds of things coming together. But I can definitely, like, I really struggle to put together a picture where like the Giants can do that, or even the Vikings, to be honest. Like, you know, it's really hard to imagine a world where like one of those two teams reaches the end of the season and goes into an NFC championship game against Philadelphia or San Francisco. And you're like, yeah, this is like, they'll be underdogs, but this is a live threat. I could see that for Green Bay. Like, they are one of the teams where I could see, if Jordan Love is that guy, that's possible.
All right, let's go to the Detroit Lions, as we mentioned, in the NFC North. They got to play front runner, so it's winning the division, absolutely. But what else, narrative-wise, this Lions team that appears to be on the upward trajectory, what's a good best-case scenario for the Lions?
I think really it's just that the linear Madden graph that we keep talking about just keeps going, right?
Yeah. It's allowed for teams. Like, it can happen for teams. It's just not always common for players.
Yeah, like they have been executing this rebuild perfectly. And ironically, a perfect rebuild is going to involve some imperfection because you're going to miss in some of your decisions. And the really important part is how you adjust to the times where you miss. And that, I think, is where I've been most impressed by Detroit. I like the idea of this multi-year process, but when they've missed, they've identified it quickly and they've adjusted and they've gone in a different direction and they fixed it so that it, like, one miss doesn't stall the entire project. So really, they're exactly where they should be right now. They are on the precipice of the playoffs. Everybody loves them. They are now the favorites, I think, for the division. And we all expect the Lions to be a really good team next year. So simply meeting expectations for them, I think, is the best case scenario, right? Is the realistic best case scenario. Being the team that everybody expects the Lions to be this season is their best case.
Other specifics I would point to is the defense. Remember how bad the defense was the first 6 or 7 weeks of the year. Then they kind of turned it around. All of the investment that they made in the secondary with Cameron Sutton coming in and Emmanuel Mosley and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, those guys panning out. Aiden Hutchinson becoming that elite pass rusher he looked like down the stretch, having that fierce defensive front, Alim McNeil in year 3, James Houston with more extensive playing time. Like, all of those defensive players really coming together, I think, is part of this best case scenario. And then Jared Goff just running the show the way he has been. Again, we sit here and push back against, hey, his stats are a little inflated last year, but he is capable of playing low 80s type of football. He did it a few years ago. If he does that with Ben Johnson and these playmakers in the offensive line, we've got a very dangerous Detroit Lions team. I think part of the worst case scenario, though, is Jared Goff, who graded at 72 last year and had a lot of turnover luck. Grading, like, if he grades at 72 again, I don't know if you can rely completely on all of the pieces around him to get the EPA per play, right? This is the way I describe it. The EPA per play in points are the goal of the offense. The quarterback's the biggest driver of that, but those are sliders as well. If Goff plays at the same level, you're relying so much on everything else to go well. And that could be part of their worst case scenario, is Jared Goff not playing well enough.
Yeah, and critically, you mentioned the turnovers there, because one of the biggest not drivers, but one of the most EPA per play is one of these stats where I like to think of it as essentially passer rating adjusted for situation, right? Like it's a composite data point that factors in not the quarterback, or factors in the quarterback, but isn't just the quarterback. It factors in like the totality of the passing game.
Yep.
And it's like passer rating, it's actually quite useful in that regard, but its use starts to fall down where you simply ascribe it to a quarterback. You know, like X had a passer rating of whatever. Well, yeah, but like if that was a screen that went 100 yards, then the quarterback's role in that was actually pretty small. It was the receiver adding it. But it's relevant that the receiver made that play. So the passer rating itself is not at the bad number. Like you hear people all the time go, passer rating is a terrible stat. It isn't. It just doesn't quite. It articulates something different to how people use it.
Yeah.
So I think EPA per play is similar, but it's better because it adjusts for situation and all those kinds, like down and distance and that kind of stuff. But it has similar flaws in that, like turnovers are huge, right? So there's nothing that will affect EPA per play more than turnovers. So if a quarterback gets lucky when it comes to turnovers, his EPA per play is going to be way better than it should be. And I think that kind of is what happened with the Lions a bit last year. So Jared Goff had a turnover-worthy play rate of 3.6%. So half a percentage point higher than the Daniel Jones one, which we were talking about is not a good number. And yet he only had 7 interceptions, right? If that swings against him, then all of a sudden Ben Johnson is not able to make magic out of this like not great performing Jared Goff. And we're not talking about like, hey, you guys are screwing Jared Goff. He's way better. Look at the stats. Like, yeah, but like, the whole point of that, the grading is that generally speaking, those stats will revert to the mean in either direction, right? So if that happens this year and Jared Goff remains this kind of 70 grade level quarterback, which is basically where Daniel Jones is as well, right? i.e. a quarterback that we are not 100% sure belongs in a starting job, right? That's effectively the level of play we are kind of talking about, whether it's Daniel Jones or Jared Goff pulling the strings here.
I wouldn't put it that far, but they're mid to low end starters, mid tier starters.
Right. Which when you're talking about committing big money to them is, I don't know if that guy belongs in a starting job. It's the same level, right? But the point being, if he catches the bad end of luck this year, now everything that this was built on, the Jared Goff narrative, the you guys are too mean to him, the Ben Johnson is a magician, like all of that loses the foundation that it was built on. And we just have a lot more concerns. The Lions will still be fine because they're a good team top to bottom, but the leg just got chopped out from under them because Jared Goff isn't any longer producing the way that he looked like he was producing last year.
Yeah, everything you said. So worst case scenario is Jared Goff stuff and all of the rebuild, the Madden trajectory just levels off or just regresses. The volatility of Emmanuel Mosley's injury and volatility of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and some of the additions just don't pan out.
But specifically,
and the Lions are a disappointment again.
Yeah, specifically, it would be that Jared Goff plays in a way that I think sort of derails the project, right? And now you're like, we thought we were golden. Now we're not sure what to do with the most important position of the game.
There's even that where it's like everything's good and they just missed the playoffs again, and it's mostly Jared Goff's fault, and we still have to figure out that position.
Right.
Dallas Cowboys. Super Bowl or bust, baby, because it's Dallas. What's the best case scenario realistically for Dallas?
The best case scenario for Dallas is that they are one of those teams that can challenge Philadelphia and San Francisco. And we reach the postseason and we don't see any reason why Dallas can't make it Super Bowl.
They got to perform better in the postseason is one of them, right? I mean, it's like they have games over the last couple of years where they have absolutely dominated like a championship team. Handful of games where it was just silly, like 33-0 against the Colts in the second half, like all these different things. But they don't have that level of consistency. So for me with Dallas, it's got to be the playoff. Like, do something in the playoffs. Make an NFC championship. Show that you can do all of that. And
don't choke.
Don't choke would be it. Show that Dak can be a little bit more consistent. And, you know, you've got Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore, two of those offseason moves that I'll probably be either raving about or will forget about, but I'll probably be raving about them throughout the year, much like I was the James Bradbury move with the Eagles. I think those are just two subtle moves that do it for Dallas, that help put them over the top. Not over the top, but it just add that level of consistency that will help and get them to the NFC Championship in this best case scenario.
They're the NFC version of the Chargers, right? The best case scenario for them is simply achieve what you're supposed to achieve every offseason. Like Dallas is the one team in the NFC that should be able to challenge the 49ers and the Eagles. Now they just need to do it.
What's the worst case scenario? They don't do
that.
it.
Not happening.
I mean, is it worse for Dallas to have the same exact season they've had the last 2 years, where both of the last 2 years, we do every single week, and it's like, who's the team you don't want to play in the playoffs? Like, there's been stretches over the last 2 years where Dallas looks like the best team in the NFL for 5 or 6 weeks. Don't want to play Dallas in the playoffs until you get to the playoffs, and it's okay. You can play them. You can beat them. Is that worse to do that again, or is it worse to actually just not make the playoffs?
No, it's probably worse to do it again. And at some point, McCarthy has to carry the can for that, right? What if their worst case scenario is actually they repeat everything, the offense takes a slight step back, and meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, Kellen Moore has turned Justin Herbert into the next Patrick Mahomes and looks like the solution to everything, and you just let him walk away?
I will say that I've defended, because I've defended Mike McCarthy at times because people are like, oh, he was a terrible play caller in Green Bay and this and that. And there was some evidence that maybe some of that was Aaron Rodgers and this, right? But that's part of the worst case scenario, is that Mike McCarthy, the criticisms of Mike McCarthy, the play caller, come back here, which is he's too vanilla. He runs too much slant flat. Yeah, he doesn't use enough motion to create open. Some of the things that Kellen Moore was pretty good at, and it's just this vanilla offense. And even with better talent, they don't produce. That would be part of the worst case scenario, is Mike McCarthy taking over play calling and the same vibes you got 5 or 6 years ago.
And particularly if, it becomes pretty clear that it's his fault and Jerry Jones doesn't make a change. Because as much as Jerry Jones embodies the sort of knee-jerk, billionaire thing, but he actually isn't. Think of how long Jason Garrett was in that job when it was manifestly clear that he had no business being there, right? That he was, at no point was he going to elevate this team to where it needed to go. And yet he clung on for years because, he was Troy's backup and Jerry Jones loved him, right? Jerry Jones does not do the things that you expect a billionaire knee-jerk owner who demands results or else to do. Mike McCarthy has already probably outlasted what you would have expected in that scenario. Like Jimmy Haslam would have fired Mike McCarthy a couple of years ago if he was owner of the Dallas Cowboys. So their true worst-case scenario is that they kind of repeat the last couple of years, but with an obvious regression in offense that becomes pretty clear that Mike McCarthy has dragged this thing in the wrong direction. And yet, because Jerry Jones is Jerry Jones, he doesn't do anything in the offseason in terms of changes. So as a Cowboys fan, you are locked into this now for next year.
I love the tinge of disappointment in your voice when you talk about Jerry Jones billionairing. He's very good at it. He's very good at it overall, but he should be making more rash decisions.
Look, I need a true role model when it comes to billionairing, and Jerry Jones is usually my guy, but in this one area, he lets the team down.
It should be like George Steinbrenner with the Yankees, hire and fire the same guy. I don't know if you know anything about that, but Steinbrenner with the Yankees had Billy Martin hired and fired at least 3 times. Now, imagine if Jerry's just if he just brought back Jimmy Johnson 4 or 5 times throughout his career. That would be amazing. Go back to Jimmy, bring Jimmy back. All right, Chicago Bears. Did we do worst case? Yeah, we did that. Chicago Bears. Best case scenario for the Bears. This is an interesting one because it's narrative land, not so much wins and losses, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's big jump from Justin Fields as a passer in particular.
Yep.
It's him realizing the kind of jump that Jalen Hurts took, and okay, last year was impressive, right? You bought yourself the job, you won it back with really no help around you because you turned out you were an incredible athlete and runner and all those kinds of things. So now we found you DJ Moore, we've given you some help. The offensive line is better. Now go out and show you can be that passer that you were at Ohio State, and then really turn yourself into an elite quarterback.
I would add to that. So completely agree, obviously, Justin Fields from a passing standpoint. I would also say all of Ryan Poles' moves, not that you hit every single one, but the investment in Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards at linebacker comes good. The draft picks, right? Darnell Wright as your first-round pick looks good as a rookie. There's a lot of good reports coming out of camp that Gervin Dexter, the second-rounder out of Florida that I thought was not the best pick, that he's looking great in camp. Prove Steve wrong with all your non-model picks. I think all of that, DJ Moore being the true number one, all of those things coming together along with Justin Fields. So a lot of what Ryan Poles touches, looking good. Justin Fields taking the next step as a passer. Worst case scenario, the opposite of those two things. Specifically, Justin Fields not taking a step forward as a passer, and you're picking in the top 10 again, and maybe you get the next quarterback, but you need a quarterback again at the end of the year, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the worst case is they got it wrong essentially this offseason, right? Where they had the option. Do you get rid of Justin Fields and draft Bryce Young at number 1 overall? Do you start again essentially, or do you put faith in Justin Fields, give him the chance to prove that he can be the guy with a better supporting cast? They went with Justin Fields. If he doesn't take a step forward, if he doesn't improve with a better supporting cast, they essentially got it wrong, probably. And if they do that, if he does that at the same time as the talent around him got better, well, now you've probably taken yourself further away from the number 1 overall pick and the chance to draft Caleb Williams or whoever it is.
Yeah, that's definitely in worst case for the Bears. But it's Fields, and then again, all of the turnover that they've had roster wise doesn't appear to be working. Whether it is Tremaine Edmonds regressing back into what he was before his breakout season, whether it is the plethora of draft picks that they've brought in the last couple of years just not being all that good, all that stuff's part of the worst case scenario for the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina Panthers are next, so their best case could be part of the Bears' worst case, like you mentioned. If Bryce Young looks like that guy already, and I know it's always fun to look at the next draft class and Caleb Williams and Drake May and whoever, but if Bryce Young looks like a star right away, if you're the Bears, you might be questioning not just taking him. But yeah, part of your best case for the Panthers has to be just positive rookie season for Bryce Young.
Not even positive. I think because Bryce Young is such a unique prospect, I think their best case is being my size matters not one jot to his performance in the NFL. And he's the same guy in the NFL as he was in college, right? Which is to say, the best quarterback in the nation. And, if he's able to be an absolute anticipation throwing savant with ad-libbing skills in the backfield, with the capacity to make plays left, right, and center, all at the same time as not turning it over ever. 2.0% turnover-worthy play rate. If he's that guy out of the box, and your only concern is that he's tiny, and we've never seen a guy do it at this size, the Panthers are good immediately. Like, that makes him like a high-level quarterback.
And specifically now, when we get to the NFC South, as we mentioned with the Saints or the Bucs, I mean, the division's wide open too. If that best case scenario hits, which is more important, you also might stumble into a division win, in the NFC South, which is all fun. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the goal as a Panthers fan, is to be like, we got to win the division this year. To me, it's always, what's Bryce Young going to be 2 and 3 years from now, and making sure that we have the pieces around him at that point. But yeah, if Bryce Young is that good right away, the Panthers have put this roster in a place where the receivers are decent enough and the line's decent enough and the defense has enough potential that they're in the NFC South mix again.
Yeah.
Worst case, Bryce Young's too short.
Their ideal range of outcomes absolutely includes winning the division, I think Bryce Young threatening the top 10 of quarterbacks day one, not day one, but like year one, is in the realistic range of most optimistic outcomes.
Top 10, like for this year, or just going forward, that he can get there?
Yeah, like going forward, like ending the season, with a PFF grade of 80 to 80, 2, 3. Like that. This is what Mac Jones did year one. He was a better quarterback than Mac Jones.
I know. That's fair. Worst case, he's too short. All of those concerns come back to bite, and they win another handful of games, and they're in the same position the Bears were. Oh, should they give up on Bryce Young after year one? Caleb Williams and Drake May are there. No, I don't know if they'll be that bad, but
true worst case is either he gets broken, with a big hit early, and you're like, wow, this guy's just too small to play at the NFL level, or he spends like his entire time trying to, he plays the way Patrick Mahomes played at Texas Tech, like not for like 7 dropbacks in the pocket, right? The rest of his entire life was spent ad-libbing on the move. And you're like, okay, this is great, but it's just not NFL play.
That's more like NFL Zach Wilson, right? Who just throws all of his passes from the right sideline somehow.
Right. Or Baker Mayfield, anything happened, he rolled out to the right and tried to find like a pass. Like something like that, you're like, this dude cannot function from a pocket.
That's a good point. It's something probably pocket presence-wise with Young, how he manipulates things and how he just operates that we would keep an eye on as far as worst-case scenario goes. And if that's the case, then the Panthers don't win many games.
Yes.
All right, 2 more teams. Atlanta Falcons. Best-case scenario, much like the Sam Howell one, is Desmond Ritter's the dude, right?
Yeah. I don't think they even need to necessarily be that optimistic, though. Like, viability for them. Like, I think Washington needs Sam Howell to be good for them to have a real, like, high-end sort of outcome. Whereas I think Atlanta really just needs somebody not to stink. And it doesn't even need to be Ritter. Like, it can be Heineke. Just better than Mariota was last year. Like, just give me viable quarterback play. Just don't be actively problematic at the position, right? We have Bijan Robinson in this backfield of studs. We have a dominant offensive line. We have good receivers, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. We have guys that can make plays. All you need to do is to not actively undermine it by being terrible.
So the other, I would say on the defensive side, as far as best case scenario, is those defensive additions need to be good as well. Jesse Bates, Calais Campbell, Caden Ellis, a lot of the turnover that they've had on the defensive side of the ball has to hit for this best case scenario. And much like every other team in the NFC South, a division title is in the range of outcomes. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because if Ritter hits and he's your guy, I think it's good though. I mean, I think a best case scenario is confidence that he's your quarterback going forward. I don't know if it's the worst case if he's bad, other than you're just, it might feel like you wasted a season with Ritter because you made those other additions, and it looks like the rest of the roster is upgraded, but it could be a waste if Ritter is a below average quarterback, graded at 55 last year. If he grades in the low to mid 60s, you're only winning a handful of games, I believe.
Yeah, their problem with him being bad is simply where the next guy's coming from. Like because the team is probably not going to be bad enough for them to be picking 1, 2, 3, whatever. Like, you need a pathway to that next quarterback, but the situation for the next quarterback should be really good. So, yeah, it's their worst case scenario is difficult to kind of articulate because I don't think they can be truly terrible.
Part of the best case scenario too is just fun. I say it's a lot of fun having Cordero Patterson and Bijan and a monster like Drake London, monster like Kyle Pitts, speedster like Scotty Miller. It's a fun team, especially if Ritter can get the ball out there to those guys. So, so I think Atlanta could be from division winner like anyone else in the NFC South back to picking in the top 10 and massive question marks at quarterback going into 2024. Arizona Cardinals, what's their best case scenario besides making sure that they pick number 1? How do we answer this question? Because in the optimism show, I was like, man, you're set up to pick number 1. Be optimistic.
Let's first answer that question. Is it better for Arizona if they pick number 1 and they have, an unblocked pathway to Caleb Williams as the next quarterback? Or if Kyler Murray comes back at week 8 and looks like an all-pro, like is immediately back to his best, maybe a little bit better, and looks just phenomenal, and he's the guy going forward? Which is better for them?
I think they're both really good. I mean, organizationally, I would probably lean Caleb Williams. But for the sake of this show, we're mostly talking about the 2023 season. So let's paint the picture of what does a good 2023 season look like for the Cardinals on the field. It involves Colt McCoy holding the fort for a little bit, and then Kyler Murray coming back and looking like he did throughout the first half of 2021, we go back into that positive trajectory.
Like, I mean, at that point, I don't even care what the Colt McCoy part looks like. It's like getting, to me, the most optimistic season for Arizona is you get through the Colt McCoy period, which lasts as short as mercifully possible. You get Kyler Murray back on the field, and Kyler Murray looks like the best version of Kyler Murray can look. And regardless of what that looks like in terms of wins and losses this season, you feel good about where the team can go going forward, because you already have the quarterback, and now you just need to put everything back together around him. But he came back from a big injury and looked as good as he's ever looked. And, you know, there's no more talk of Call of Duty and, you know, homework and all that kind of crap, right? Like, the off-field stuff, whatever it is with Kyler Murray, disappears, and the on-field stuff looks as good as it's ever looked. And the organization, for the first time in a long time, looks like it has a clear, and not even a long time, actually, the first time in a couple of years, looks like it has a clear pathway towards being good.
I'll buy all that. And then the other part I would say is, if, like any other first-year coach, we don't know what Jonathan Gannon is actually going to be, but if he's like a Brian Daboll and all of a sudden the Cardinals are winning all these one-score games and he's, you know, turning the right dials and making the right moves, and it's like, oh, maybe they found an awesome head coach, not just another head coach. That would be something to keep an eye out for if you're a Cardinals fan as well.
Or simply, you know, as a defensive-minded guy, if he's able to somehow tap into, like, if he's able to resuscitate the careers of Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons and, you know, the young, talented players that they have on defense, Cameron Thomas, Myjai Sanders, BJ Ojolari, I mean, even like guys like Marco Wilson, like, they actually have a lot of young talent on this defense. It's underachieved, but there's pieces there. Like, if he's able to come in and 3 or 4 of those guys look like different players, that's huge.
Now, the worst case scenario is all those guys look like the same players. And there's not a lot of talent on this team, and they might not win a game.
Yeah, the worst
Kyler
case
Murray
scenario
doesn't come back, the whole thing.
Worst case scenario is one of the worst defenses you've ever seen on paper, is one of the worst defenses you've ever seen on the field. That having an offensive line with 3 left tackles in it is a problem. That your quarterback being Colt McCoy in year 12 of Colt McCoy's career is simply not an NFL level system.
Year 14 for Colt McCoy,
like,
by the way.
Either Kyler Murray doesn't come back in the season or comes back for like 3 games and looks like crap. And now you have no idea what you're doing as a franchise.
Yeah, but it ends up being good. Because maybe you get your quarterback.
But you have the clear pathway through to Caleb Williams.
Yeah, so bad can be good. But yeah, on the field, there's definitely a worst case scenario as far as win totals go. Yeah, the Cardinals look like they could be getting the number 1 pick. Over under for them is 4.5 this year.
Actually,
it might be.
You know what a worst case scenario for them might be is actually that Kyler Murray comes back and sort of plots a course somewhere in the middle where he doesn't look amazing, he doesn't look bad, and now you don't know. Because you're good, like, the Cardinals are unlike any of these other teams where they will have a shot at Caleb Williams because they have that extra first-round pick, and they're probably going to stink. So, but even if they don't stink enough to pick number 1 overall, because they have the extra first, they're going to have a shot at number 1 if they want it, right? So they're always going to have a shot at getting Caleb Williams. So the worst thing that can happen for them is you don't know if Kyler Murray is your guy going, if you should go with Caleb Williams, because Kyler Murray has shown maybe just enough, but not enough for you to go 100%. He's our guy. He looked good, but not great.
He's also just difficult to trade anyway. So, like, we keep saying, hey, just go get Caleb Williams, but you're gonna incur some rough cap hits and various things like that if you do try to trade Kyler Murray. But yeah, it's gonna be an interesting year for the Cardinals once they get to those decisions. All 32 teams are done, I believe. Don't think we forgot anyone. That's it, man. Best and worst case scenarios for every team in the NFC. It was reverse alphabetical order today. And that's the same thing we did on Monday. Go check out the AFC show if you have not already. And like I said earlier, please email us, nflpodcast@pff.com. I want to review an old draft. We'll put a poll out there on some of the more exciting ones. Was it Michael Vick going number 1 overall? Aaron Rodgers fall in 2005? Is it the 08 draft? I don't know why I keep saying that, but it's online. 2010 draft was really interesting. Let's see. Let's talk. We'll review an old draft that you guys are looking for. Anyway, I'm done talking. I've got nothing else. You're going back to the Florida heat. You survived. Is it hot over there?
It's pretty hot.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Yeah. There's a lot of air conditioning is the key I'm discovering.
All right. I think we got Trevor and Brad for you tomorrow. I believe this is the Wednesday show, and they'll be here on the Thursday show. Who knows? Who knows? But we appreciate everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon here, PFF NFL Podcast.